This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to answer the question, all aboard the Bitcoin Trump train. This is going to be one of my most important videos ever, so I really beg you to watch it all the way to the end, and only then let me know what you think, because this is going to be a complex, nuanced discussion that you won't often see on YouTube or social media, especially in an election year. This is a follow-up to my video, Extremely Dangerous to Our Democracy. Many people interpreted my last few videos, including the post-assassination attempt on Trump video, as a subtle endorsement of Trump for president. So I wanted to correct a few things. I am not pro-Trump, and I am not pro-Biden and Harris. People think that it's some sort of political smokescreen when I say that I don't actually believe in the red-blue two-party politics game, but it really is true, and I believe that we're long past the point where we can vote ourselves to a better place in the U.S. That's why I sometimes joke in the comment section that you just aren't voting hard enough and you need to vote harder to fix things. Every 4 years, we violently lurch from one party back to the other party in the U.S. We say that last administration was incompetent children. Now the mature adults are going to be in charge. This time we're really going to fix things. Trust us. Trump was a breath of fresh air, and he ran a hilarious and brilliant, and yes, often offensive campaign in 2016. Then he won, proceeded to hire the swamp, Steve Mnuchin, John Bolton, people like this. He hired the very swamp that he had promised to drain. Meanwhile, 4 years later, Biden promised to reunite the country and return rule to the adults in the room. Those adults unfortunately brought us more foreign wars, a lot of inflation, and an administration that privileged DEI over actual competence in running the biggest organization in the world, all while trying to cover up Biden's increasing dementia. If you ever needed an example of how things can keep running, even when the commander-in-chief is permanently out to lunch, you now have it. And it should lead you to ask whether the president is always just a puppet and someone else, whether it's the deep state or donors, is pulling the strings, which is clearly how it always works in my opinion. We the people come last. We're the idiots at the poker table who get played every 4 years. So why else do I think that we can't vote ourselves out of this mess? Well, there's currently $35 trillion in U.S. federal debt, and then an astounding $217 trillion in future unfunded liabilities that will slowly transmute themselves into debt that's on the balance sheet. Those are the liabilities that need to be serviced by an economy that is only $28 trillion. That's what U.S. GDP is now. And so this debt load is so massive compared to the size of the real economy that needs to service it. And it's impossible to service it and do that without massive money printing from the Fed, from the central bank in the U.S., which will need to buy most of that future debt and print money in order to do it. And that means that high inflation is not going to go away in our lifetime. In fact, it's going to get a lot worse because high inflation always leads to domestic strife, possibly civil war, and the motivation for politicians to distract people by starting external wars. You can tax people into oblivion and it's still not going to fix this situation because the size of the economy is so small relative to the size of this debt. For example, total U.S. billionaire wealth is approximately 5 or 6 trillion, so you could do a massive communist socialist wealth confiscation game and still not make a dent in the debt. Again, we're talking about 217 trillion in unfunded future liabilities. There's nothing any U.S. president can do at this point to solve the debt situation, not even moving us immediately onto a Bitcoin standard, which would be the equivalent of an immediate $28 trillion default and would immediately defund the U.S. government. It's impossible to move enough money into Bitcoin in order to save this situation. I'll link in the description notes below to this chart of GDP, 28 trillion, and then the number, the place where I'm getting this U.S. unfunded liabilities number from, 217 trillion. And replacing the guy at the top every 4 years is going to do nothing to change these economic realities, unfortunately. And so often culture is downstream from economics, as I've said many times on this channel. If you're enjoying this video so far, I'd ask you to just help to support the channel. Please click the subscribe button. That really helps out with the algorithm. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. Also share this video with a friend or family member. I'd really like a lot of people to see this, not because I want the clicks, but because this is a really, really important message. And I think that I'm analyzing it in the correct way, though of course I want to hear what you have to say about that. Now, most of these unfunded liabilities are Medicare and Social Security. If the president, the future president, and Congress attempted to fund those programs, they will be immediately voted out and replaced by someone who will immediately reinstate these programs. Belt tightening never works, especially when it comes to large federal governments. Now, the next biggest budget item is interest on the debt. The U.S. cannot and will not default on this debt, and so those interest payments will continue to be made, especially because the U.S. can always just print up those interest payments, which means more money printing and more inflation and the societal consequences to that. Now, the next biggest budget item in the U.S. budget is the Department of War. That's what it was called in the old days. It's now called the Department of Defense, though it really is more of a Department of War still. One of the nicer things about Trump, the first Trump administration, is that he was not as much of a warmonger in his first term as Bush Jr., Obama, and Biden have been. Trump did drop a giant bomb on Afghanistan at the beginning of his term, but at least he had the good sense not to fan the flames of a proxy war with Russia that could easily turn nuclear. Will Trump actually end the war in Ukraine as he has promised to do? I think that would be great. I think he should sit down with Putin and hammer out a peace agreement that moves us back from nuclear Armageddon. And this is not to say that you or I should like Putin, but this is the situation that we're in. We have two giant countries that each have something like 5,000, 6,000 nukes, and this is where we are now. Right now, as things are, if anyone sneezes at the wrong time, we could instantly enter a global thermonuclear war. And the fact that this hasn't happened since 1945 means that we've been very, very lucky, not that we've been smart. And so we should not become complacent about these things. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were one submarine officer's decision away from a global nuclear war. He was all ready to launch the missile, and then he was overridden by a superior. So hopefully a Trump administration would have the good sense to sit down and work with Putin to end the Ukraine conflict. But will Trump rein in his VP, who seems quite eager for a disastrous war with Iran? This is J.D. Vance the other day. One of the first things he said after being nominated as VP, a lot of people recognize that we need to do something with Iran, but not these weak little bombing runs. If you're going to punch the Iranians, you punch them hard. I personally want no part of this, especially since I have sons who could be drafted. I am not interested in seeing my children serve in foreign war escapades that enrich the deep state but do nothing to make ordinary Americans more safe. And if you think the U.S. won't bring back the draft if we enter World War III, you're quite naive. I also have friends and subscribers in Iran and elsewhere in the Middle East, so I would tell J.D. Vance to shut the F up. The U.S. cannot afford a war like this, and like the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and the Ukraine war that Biden has been presiding over, it will do absolutely nothing to make Americans safer. If you're strongly rooting for the red team or the blue team, you need to understand what's actually going on here. Both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are firmly in the grip of the deep state, which includes the National Security Council, the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, military contractors, the military industrial complex, as it's called, the Congressional Armed Services Committee, and other actors. This is not a stupid conspiracy theory. This is the obvious reality to anyone who can uncover it if they do the work. And unfortunately, U.S. elections cannot undo this problem. You cannot vote out the deep state. All you can do is defund it. If you send a good man to Washington, D.C., he'll be absorbed and co-opted by the swamp. So why is Silicon Valley on board the Trump train? Because Silicon Valley always plays both sides, and they always win. If Democrats win, it's great for the surveillance state and companies like Meta and Google. If Republicans win, it's great for the surveillance state and companies like Palantir, Anduril, etc. So you can vote red or blue, but the end result will always be the same. And I've lived long enough to see this play out. The end result of your vote will always be endless war, or will be the endless expansion of the surveillance state. And these will be cloaked in different colors to make it palatable to the voting base. But what you'll end up with is war and surveillance. Will a second Trump administration be any different? I'll bet you 1 million sats. I'll bet you 10 million sats. I'll bet you 100 million sats that the answer is no. Here's my prediction. Bitcoiners who put their hope in Trump are going to be extremely disappointed. And it makes me sad to say this. I really hope that I'm wrong. I have nothing against the man. I say this as someone who really wants to believe that Trump is going to do the right thing for Bitcoiners. But even now, he's showing some signs of what's to come. His son will be shilling scammy shitcoins at the Nashville Bitcoin conference, not even waiting till the election's over. He'll be shilling the MAGA token under the blessing of David Bailey, who's the CEO of the Bitcoin conference. Here's another thing that Trump has been doing in the last couple of days. He's been attacking El Salvador President Nayib Bukele. He claims Bukele is shipping criminals into the U.S. and making it look like he's decreasing crime. This is just simply not true. What Bukele has done instead has jailed many, many violent offenders in his country. And people have tried to correct Trump on this, but he's really digging in his heels, which suggests to me that someone else has his ear. And then one of the biggest red flags, of course, is Trump saying that he considered Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan and has been part of the deep state for a very, very long time, nominating him to serve as Secretary of the Treasury would just be completely disastrous. I don't believe for a minute that Jamie Dimon has had some revelation and all of a sudden likes Bitcoin. So should you vote for Kamala instead? Yes, if you are stupid and want to hear her mindless cackling for 4 more years and her complete lack of experience. And the end result is you're still going to end up getting ruled over by the deep state. We just found that Elizabeth Warren has just endorsed Kamala Harris for president. So that should tell you something, as Predator says here, about Kamala's Bitcoin policy. Should you vote for RFK Jr. instead? You definitely could, but that would be more of a symbolic statement since it's mathematically impossible for him to win, unfortunately. He does understand that the deep state killed his father and his uncle, which probably explains why he will never be allowed to win. Am I saying that it's hopeless and that you shouldn't vote? Not really, maybe, I don't know. What I am saying, though, is that you shouldn't be devoting very much time and energy to this election. And the only reason that I've been covering it at all here is because it's hard to ignore when presidential candidates start talking about Bitcoin. I'm going to try to cover it as little as possible going forward. Maybe Trump will surprise us all if he's elected and do some really great things for Bitcoin, but I am very naturally cynical and skeptical about this. So I'd encourage all of us to try to tune out the endless election noise. Focus instead on your family. Focus instead on your local community. Focus on becoming more self-sufficient, both on your online life and in your offline life. And focus on Bitcoin. Focus on Nostr. Don't cut off friends and family members that you've known forever just because you disagree with their voting. The deep state has been pursuing a divide and conquer strategy. It wants us to dissipate our energy fighting with each other. And instead, what we all need to do is to stick together in spite of our very real differences and do our best to tell people about the real battle that's going on. The real battle lines are between the deep state, the central bankers, the warmongers, versus human beings who just want to live their lives in peace, have children, and spend time with their families. So I would say the best election strategy that I would suggest, if you agree with this, buy Bitcoin, get on Nostr. This can be very, very important for getting news, and also buy some extra food, water, and medical supplies just in case. And I have to say, I'll be extremely relieved if we finish this year without a major catastrophe unfolding. If you want to learn more about Nostr, I'll also link to this in the description notes below. You can think of it as sort of a decentralized Twitter, though it's much, much more than that. And like Bitcoin, it's decentralized enough that no one can stop it, turn it off, or censor it. And I think this is going to be a very, very important resource to have in your toolbox going forward for the rest of this election year and what is coming down the pike. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.